Megatheropods. Welcome guys, once again to the channel Ranking with Dinosaurs, where we rank, you guessed it, dinosaurs. And today we're going to be looking at a much bigger group. We're going a little bit, much more general. So I've been talking about dinosaurs for, a few months already. You know, as you can see then by the name of the channel, if you've been seeing the videos. So today we're going to be looking at Megatheropods. Now, strictly speaking, Megatheropods are, much smaller, subsidiary of the dinosaur company. But I'm gonna, insert a little bit more of, of the medium to large size theropods, not only the mega huge giants. What that means is that probably not the small to medium ones are not gonna be here, but there are gonna be some medium-sized theropods to big size that maybe don't comply exactly with the term megatheropod, but I'm gonna put him in here because I can do it. And so the list is not just 4 entries. So without further ado, gonna be starting with ABELISAURS. So with the first group that we're gonna be talking about today are ABELISAURS, and I have to say this gotta be one of my favorite groups. Right at the gate, I might put it this is gonna be gonna rank pretty high. So just a little heads up. But ABELISAURS are such an interesting and just a crazy group of theropods. And they're not the biggest ones, they're not the smallest ones either, but they're one of the weirdest, because for you to be called a theropod, which it's pretty standard. You have your you're bipedal, you have a head that you can snatch things, you may or may not use your arms for some this or that, you have a stiff tail to help you with balance. But these ABELISAURS, yes, they have all of that, but they take it to the absolute extreme. Starting with those arms, I mean, they are the most characteristic part of these guys. You can see it right here with Majungasaurus. Those almost vestigial arms, that skull, which is very short, but they're also very deep, so they have pretty strong bite forces for not so huge theropods. But yes, ABELISAURS, I love them. There are a lot of ABELISAURS that we've known and we've discovered throughout the years. They're mostly from Gondwana, the Gondwana supercontinent, which is from the southern hemisphere. However, we have found some ABELISAURS in Europe, for example. So if you want to go for the most basal ones, you got Cryptops and Rugops, which are much more smaller in size. But then you got the two major like groups within ABELISAURIdae, which are Majungasaurians, which mostly found in yes, Europe and Africa. You got Rajasaurus in India, Rahilosaurus, Arcovinator, and the namesake Majungasaurus. And then you got Brachyrostra, which they are different than Majungasaurians, not only because of their location, which is South America, but because they also have their skulls are much different. Well, not much different, but they're much shorter, and they have much deeper skulls, and their legs are somewhat longer. And Majungasaurians are notably for being really short. But within that other group of Brachyrostra, we got Equixnatosaurus, Pygmalisaurus, Alcasaurus, ABELISAURS, and the goat Carnotaurus. I have to put ABELISAURS in S tier. I'm sorry, but they're one of my favorite groups of dinosaurs in general. Megaraptora. Now we're gonna be moving on with Megaraptora, a group that is very much shrouded in mystery and very much uncertainty, since we still don't know precisely where to put them in a phylogenetic cladogram. But we're doing our best. Well, not us. Paleontologists are doing their best to try to solve the mystery of the Megaraptorans, since we got some groups who put it like right outside Tyrannosauria, so they're not exactly related to these guys, but Coelurosaurus, which is a pretty much a consensus that has been reached, but some others put him inside of Tyrannosauria. So, it's constantly, between, this and that. But Megaraptorans are awesome nonetheless. They are one of the coolest dinosaurs, the Megatheropods, I would say. They're not huge, like, some of the biggest ones. They're definitely not small. But, they could hunt big game since, they had a characteristic, which is, those long arms and armed with claws. That's like their most, defining characteristic, I would say. Again, we don't know a ton, which, comes to the next, our next point, which is, the head. Most Megaraptoran material from, the skull area comes from not a juvenile, but not a fully grown animal. So this could be, their obviously ontogeny plays a part in all this. But if we don't know exactly how it looks fully grown, we can be 100% certain. So Megaraptorans, again, very mysterious animals. We still, for the animals that we have, like the most basal members, or the ones that are most least closely related to Megaraptor are Fukuraptor from Japan, and Australopithecus from Australia. And as for Megaraptor, you got Megaraptoridae, you got the namesake Megaraptor, you got Urusraptor, Erostion, Orcoraptor, Tratayenia, and one of the most complete ones that we found recently is Maip Macrothorax, one of the coolest names to ever be bestowed upon a dinosaur. But yes, Megaraptorans, as much as I love them, I cannot give them that much of a higher rank because, still very much shrouded again in mystery, the mist of the past. So Megaraptorans, I'm gonna put them in B tier. I love them, but I cannot justify putting them much higher. Carcharodontosauridae. Moving on once again, and we're gonna land at a certain group that is very famous, especially very famous in early to mid Cretaceous. That was, one of the top, if not the top predator of this period. Carcharodontosaurs, again, are very popular. I think you might have heard of, Carcharodontosaurus and Giganotosaurus, even prior to, the Jurassic World film. But these guys are extremely huge. When you think of Megatheropods, one of the things you're gonna think about are Carcharodontosaurs, especially Giganotosaurus, since its discovery, it was contested. It contested T-Rex in being the largest land predator to ever walk the earth. So quite a feat, if you ask me. But yes, so Carcharodontosaurs, once again, they have huge heads. These are the definition of megatheropods. Again, the name means shark-tooth lizard. So makes reference to their blade-like teeth, which were serrated, and this helped them to in their lifestyle of which is not 100% known as in every dinosaur, but especially Carcharodontosaurs from South America, because these are mostly Gondwana dinosaurs as well. Their actual dietary preferences, or mostly it is theorized that they were mostly sauropods, and those blade-like teeth helped them just take chunks of the sauropods and just eat them. So they didn't have to necessarily kill these giant titans. They just had to get their meals and get the hell out of there. But yes, Carcharodontosaurs, awesome animals. Again, some of their contestants for huge biggest predator are still out there. Still, it's not 100% known. Carcharodontosaurs are, again, a little bit not very complete, not Megaraptora level, but not Tyrannosaur level either. So, I would say right in the middle. Carcharodontosaurs do have a lot of members, though. I would say the oldest ones are, Neovenator, Eocarcharia, Concavenator, which is, one of the on the smaller size. And, we got an outlier in Acrocanthosaurus in the northern hemisphere, North America. But if you want to talk, the most popular ones, I mean, you got to go with Carcharodontosaurus from, North Africa, and then South America, which has the highest concentration of these guys in, within the clade Gigantosaurini. So that's going to be, Meraxes, Tyrannotitan, Maposaurus, Torovenator, and, Gigantosauros, the goat. As much as I love Carcharodontosaurus, I believe I'm going to put him in A tier. I think that's pretty fair for these guys. They're awesome. Megalosauridae. Megalosauridae is one of the groups that I, kind of inserted here, and, so you just wouldn't notice. But no, yeah, Megalosauridae. They're not known for having, the largest theropods, but, I don't know if this is as controversial as putting, Megaraptorans. But I love Megalosaurids. And, their most, I would say, famous members are, on the larger side for theropods, but, they're not the largest. Again, they're kind of in the same length as Megaraptorans. Although not as crazy since, I consider Megalosaurs, the vanilla of the theropods. They're pretty standard. They have, their very rectangular looking skulls, and their, limb proportions are, fairly, I would say average. I would say their legs are a little shorter on the shorter side, but, they compensate that with their arms, which are, not the longest as Megaraptorans, but, very functional, I would say. Aided probably in, a lot of different tasks that these dinosaurs would embark on. But, Megalosauridae obviously has the first dinosaur to be ever named, Megalosaurus. And then you got, within Megalosauridae, you got, Afrovenator, Duria Venator, if I remember correctly, Weihen Venator, which from Germany, and then you got the biggest megalosaur, Torvosaurus, one of probably the largest predator of the Jurassic, both in North America and Europe. But as well in this Megalosauridae, you got Eustreptus spondylinae, which has Eustreptus spondylus, but it also has Magnosaurus and Streptus spondylus, which I did just find out while trying to research for this video. There's Eustreptus spondylus, and then there's just Streptus spondylus. Gotta get it right. Get it right. I have to be honest. Megalosaurids are not my favorite group of dinosaurs. Not even one of my favorite group of theropods either. So I don't think I'm doing anything crazy when I say I believe I'm gonna put him in C tier. Honestly, THERIZINOSAURIA. This is another one of those groups that I trying to insert here without you trying to notice. But yeah, THERIZINOSAURIA, again, this is a group of theropods which do things a little bit different than most of the other ones. Specifically, they are mostly herbivorous theropods. Yes, these guys with their large guts processed a lot of plant material since that's what they were feeding on. They had these longer necks with much smaller heads, which were perfect for reaching the treetops and get vegetation where smaller dinosaurs could not get to. Now you might be thinking, well, they're theropods and they're herbivores, so yeah, they're bipedal. Yes, they don't have a long tail like other theropods. They have much shorter ones. But you might be thinking, oh well, then they're probably they can't defend themselves, or they're the damsel in distress of the theropod groups. But no, they might be one of the scariest ones, since when you look at their arms, you see huge ass claws. Now, I did say I put them here, and because they're not technically megatheropods, but their largest member is pretty freaking huge, and some of the other members are pretty large as well. I would say, but a lot of the other members too are kind of small, but they do share a common characteristic, which are those long arms with long claws. Now, the claws do vary in size a lot. Don't get me wrong, but the biggest claws are the largest claws in probably the animal kingdom that have ever been discovered. On Therizinosaurus, it is huge. Those things could, if they are swung towards anything that would disturb him, like that would even dare disturb him. I don't know what animal would even do such a stupid thing, but if it did that, come on, he's getting swung on, probably killed as well. In the meantime, while he's feeding on some gentle plants, but Therizinosaurs, awesome animals. They're some of the coolest looking as well. I would say in the ranking, I think they're gonna go pretty high. And as far as the Therizinosaurs, we got the most basal ones, which are Falcarius and much later BPLosaurus, which is one of the smaller ones. Falcarius is actually pretty big, but Theresinosauroidea, uh, you got stuff like Oxosaurus, Arlianosaurus, Enigmasaurus, Sushusaurus, which they're not small, but they're not megatheropod size. But then you go to Therizinosauridae, and then you got stuff like Segnosaurus, pretty huge. Erlikosaurus, Nothronychus is huge, and the biggest one, obviously, Therizinosaurus. So, am I going crazy when I say I'm gonna put him in A tier, and I might put him above Carcharodontosaurus? I don't think so, and I'm going to. A tier for Therizinosauria. Spinosauridae. Oh boy, we're moving on to quite a famous group of theropods, which may or may not have the largest theropod to have ever been discovered. Probably not, as we'll discuss later, but Spinosaurids are still some of the coolest, if not the coolest, theropods that have ever walked the earth. Honestly, these guys are awesome. They get their names because, well, first of all, Spinosaurus, but one characteristic that they all have is that they have these elongated skulls, which, are very thin and very crocodile-like, which, implies that these guys hit a much more piscivorous diet. They like to dabble in some sushi and some, nice carp and salmon and fish on the side. Basically, they liked to fish. They probably lived close to riverbanks and coastal areas. And these guys were, I don't want to say worldwide, but they were almost in every continent, honestly. Well, not in every one, but a lot of continents. And well, yeah, most of them, I think. I think only in North America we don't have any actual Spinosaur fossils, but you got some remains, some very sparse remains in South America, and Africa, Europe specifically, and some in Asia as well. You might be surprised, but yes, these guys were pretty large. These guys fit the label of Megatheropods pretty well. They're, I would leave, one of the big three, since one of them were contenders for the largest theropod to ever walk the earth, in the coolest, and probably a lot of people's favorite dinosaur, Spinosaurus. But these guys were, again, huge, but not the biggest ones, since Spinosauridae gets divided in two little clades right here. The most basal one, Velibonabanatrix, was from Europe, so I believe it might have Spinosaurus might have originated around this area, maybe Europe, maybe Africa. But for the first clade, Baryonychines, these guys, unlike Spinosaurians, do not have a large sail-like structure on their backs. Baryonychines are much more adept at having a much more terrestrial lifestyle. They probably ate. They were less specialized, to say it in a way. Yeah, less specialized to hunting fish, but they still loved hunting their fish. Don't get me wrong. We have fossils of baryonyx, the primal baryonychine, with fish scales in their guts. For other baryonychines, you got Iberaspinus, Riparovenator, Ceratopsucops, and the African baryonychine Suchomimus, one of the coolest ones, which I do want to show you. I did get this Spinosaurus, this Suchomimus figure. This is a Paposuchomimus, the new one that came out. It might be a little big for my collection, but it's awesome. I mean, look at this thing, so cool. You can see the long arms with this signature claw, which was much larger than the other two, and they probably used these to hunt their I would say fish, but honestly, anything that would get in their way, that would if you get slapped by that, you're getting cooked, bro. But yes, and speaking of the other clade, Spinosaurinae, you got Camarillasaurus, Ichthyovenator, which is from Asia, Irritator, which is from Brazil, and Sigilmasasaurus, which is a little controversial, but also from Brazil, and the guy, the goat, probably some people's favorite dinosaur again, Spinosaurus, the real greatest theropod. So, I mean, Spinosauridae, I'm gonna put him in S tier. I gotta put him on top of S tier. Tyrannosaurus. So we're gonna be ending the tier list with the most famous members of the Megatheropods, the Tyrannosaurs. Now, Tyrannosauria in general is dates back to the Jurassic, with basal members like Dilong, Guanlong, Proceratosaurus, Sinotyrannus, and these guys, they're not particular megatheropods because they're pretty freaking small. But by the end Cretaceous, we see that Tyrannosaurus actually defined the word megatheropod. Like, we know megatheropods because Tyrannosaurs were like the example of this word. They had huge heads with huge teeth. They basically hunted everything or did everything with their heads. Their forelimbs, they were almost I would say, I don't want to say vestigial because they still had some use. They could actually, specifically Tyrannosaurus, it has been noted that it could lift a lot of weight, like I believe 400 to 500 kilograms. So that's pretty strong. It's much stronger than any person. But yes, so Tyrannosaurs are again a very diverse group. The actual members of Tyrannosauroidea, I want to say, differ a lot between them. There are two clades. Well, there's one clade that is pretty small. It is Albertosaurinae, which does have Gorgosaurus and Albertosaurus, which for a long time it was debated if they were the same animal, but because they look alike a lot. But before Albertosaurinae, we got some other Tyrannosaurs like Electrosaurus, Dryptosaurus, Brachiosaurus, and Bistahiverster, which some of these members are actually on the Appalachian side of the continent. But as we all know, the big boys, the absolute largest guys, are in Tyrannosaurinae. Well, not necessarily Tyrannosaurinae, but you got Alioramini, which are contains Alioramus and Chiansosaurus, both from Asia, which are smaller tyrannosaurs with much slender snouts. But then we got the Tyrannosaurians from both North America and Asia, which are some of the largest theropods to ever walk the earth. You got stuff like Daspletosaurus, one of the coolest Tyrannosaurs that were found, because we found so many fossils that we got even 3 different species for those. We got stuff like Nanucosaurus as far north as very northernmost Canada, Teratophonius, Lithernax, and then you got the big 3 Tyrannosaurs, I would say. 2 are from Asia, Sushin Tyrannus, which it's a little bit debated on whether it's valid or not, but for now it is. And it is pretty huge. Comparable in size to Tarbosaurus, which is, the much more famous cousin, again, from Asia, Mongolia, to be more precise. And then, you got the goat, T-Rex, Tyrannosaurus Rex, from North America. The largest theropod to ever walk the earth, that we've discovered at least. And I don't think it's going to change in a long time unless, some crazy fossils are found from other different animals, other theropods. But as of now, Tyrannosaurus is the biggest theropod. With all of this being said, I don't think Tyrannosaurs are my favorite group of dinosaurs, even theropods. And I mean, I still love them and appreciate them for what they are. So I'm not gonna put them like low on the tier list. Don't get me wrong. I'm not crazy, but I think they're gonna share the tier with Carcharodontosaurs. I think they're above Carcharodontosaurs, but I think THERIZINOSAURS are a little bit weird. And they're a little more peculiar looking, so I'll give them the edge over Tyrannosaurs. And that is going to be the tier list, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Please comment on the video. Helps a lot. Please let me know which is your favorite group of Megatheropods. Tell me why is it Megalosaurus and why I am wrong. But no, yeah. Shout out again to some honorable mentions like Ornithomimids, which do not have very large members, but they do have Dinokairos. And I was, a little bit hesitant on putting it there and putting it here, but I didn't at the end of the day. And a shout out to Gigantoraptor, a Oviraptorid, which, I could put Gigantoraptor here, but, I'm putting the group as a whole. And I feel like Gigantoraptor does not, represent all of Oviraptoridae, which are, much, much smaller animals. So, yeah. Those two shoutouts, please, guys, let me know in the comments once again. So, how can you help the channel? Please like the video, helps a lot. Subscribe, it helps even more. And I will see you guys in the next video. Please let me know what other videos you want to watch.